Hi there. In this episode, how I got great deals on music gear and also an Acura NSX. My channel is about music and tech. If you're here for the NSX story, it's towards the end. A little history first. I learned the art of the deal from my mother, from the age of about 4 or 5 until I was old enough for my mother to leave me at home alone. She used to drag me from one junk antique store to another. Unfortunately for me, there was no shortage of this type of store in the city in which we lived in Europe. There was no pocket electronics like game machines or cell phones, so I spent hours in damp, dusky, musky junk stores staring blankly while she cut deals on all kinds of antique furniture and bric-a-brac. To her credit, she knew what she was doing, and she always made money on the things she purchased. A little of her know-how rubbed off on me, and I've used that know-how to save money by getting great deals on gear. I certainly don't buy gear to resell it at a profit, though I've had plenty of opportunities. I buy it to use it, and I want a great deal. First, where should you be looking? Local music stores and Craigslist, though you do have to be careful of scams. eBay and Reverb, and I would say especially Reverb, where you can make offers and the cost to seller is less. It's a lot less for sellers to sell on Reverb, and those savings can get passed on to you. When there are 20 identical items for sale, say a Lexicon effects processor, you can start hitting up the different sellers with an email to see what they would accept. Time is money to some people, but if you have the time and you're willing to do the legwork of querying sellers, you can save a lot of money, typically 20 to 30% without too much trouble, and often more. Some people are anxious to make a sale so they can buy their next cool piece of gear. That's something you can take advantage of. My first big tip is patience, and you'll see in some of the stories I share at the end how patience paid off for me. You have to have the attitude that you may want something desperately, but you are willing to wait until you get it at your price. Small and large online music stores often have used music gear that comes in on trade or consignment. Guitar Center, Music Go Round, and others. Just because the price listed is $500 doesn't mean you can't offer $400. The worst they can do is say no. You have to try. That's big tip number 2. Salvation Army, Goodwill, and other charity and consignment stores are all great places to find great deals on used gear. Big tip number 3, be polite. Don't argue that you can get it elsewhere cheaper, that it's overpriced, or there are 30 identical items for sale on Reverb. At the best, it's pointing out the obvious, and at the worst, they will probably see it as you being rude. Many of these types of arguments reek of desperation and are likely to get a very negative response. Do your homework. Know what an item is worth. If you have access to it, make sure it's fully functional. If you don't have access, make sure it is returnable if it's not as advertised. Make your best offer knowing how much you'll increase your offer if necessary to secure the deal, but you set yourself a limit and stick to it. Part of being polite is making an offer that is fair but highly beneficial to you. That's where doing your homework comes in. If an item is out of your reach of, say, a serious offer, then you can make your best offer that may be considered a lowball offer, provided it is no less than 55% of what they are asking. Anything below that and you're just asking for sharp language, you may get it anyway. Sometimes qualifying your offer makes a difference. Other times it may still get you a very sharp no. An example of a qualified lowball offer might be, I know the Juno 106 you're selling is worth your $1,200 asking price, but I only have $750. I don't want to offend you, but would you consider $750? Their response might be an unqualified no, Or you might get a response of the lowest price they would be willing to take, say $950. This probably means you could get the item for $925, maybe even $900. But understand that pushing too hard at this point can make the qualification you originally made evaporate and make them mad. If they counteroffer and it's nowhere close, it's usually better to be polite and decline, rather than to continue negotiating. You can always come back another day. Remember the first rule: be patient. Don't get caught up in the fervor of negotiations. Second, know what you are getting. Many folks looking for gear type things like Juno 106, Roland Juno 106, specs, manual, etc. You should also be searching for Juno 106 problems, Juno 106 issues, nightmare. Know what you are getting. It's easy to get blinders on when you have your heart set on something, but don't forget big tip number 1, patience. Big tip number 4, don't settle for less than what you truly want. The easiest quality to talk about here is condition. Poor versus good versus excellent. Don't settle for a piece of gear that is $50 to $100 cheaper because it's all banged up. Make a deal on the best condition unit. It'll probably last longer and you'll be happier, especially if you ever have to resell it. Don't buy the lesser model of the unit because you don't have the money for the better model now. Be patient and get the item you really want. For example, don't buy a DX9 when you want a DX7, an M3R instead of an M1R, a Dep 3 instead of a Dep 5. If you don't know these items, that's fine. Just know that the first one I listed is the less capable baby sister of the second unit. A friend and I coined a phrase back in the 80s of GHI, gotta have it, or GHIN, where N is now. But be patient. Getting a deal on an item you think you can fix. Let's talk about that. I do this from time to time, and I have mostly been successful. There are simple fixes like replacing a CR2032 battery and reloading patches. Replacing an LCD backlight on an older piece of gear can be simple or pretty hard, depending on whether you know how to solder, disassemble, and reassemble gear. You don't want to buy a fixer-upper and make it worse. Recapping a power supply can be medium difficulty or hard, once again depending on your electronic skills. Beyond this, you may be looking at multiple fixes on a unit, and you may need a multimeter, an ESR tester, an oscilloscope. If you don't have the equipment and the skills, you must either send it out for repair or resell the item, and it may no longer be a good deal. Know what you are getting and be skeptical. Some users will try to fix an item and may do more harm than good. It's okay to ask, have you already tried to fix the item? But there is no guarantee they will tell you the truth. Big tip number 5, don't buy someone else's problems. That's essentially it for my brief set of buying tips. I'm now going to discuss 4 short stories of buying a used Acura NSX, a used Yamaha DX7IIFD, a baby grand piano, and a Taylor guitar, all of which incorporate my buying strategies. And then I have one really cool thing to tell you at the end. Let's start with the Taylor guitar. A friend and I were at a local music store, not far away from here, over in Campbell, California. He spotted a used acoustic Taylor guitar and he really wanted it. He called the boss, his wife, on his cell phone and got the okay. He told me, I asked him how much it was, and I forget, but let's just say it was $2,300 because it was something like that. I asked how much he was going to offer and he said, the price is $2,300. I told him to offer $1,800 and he flatly refused. I spent the next 20 minutes persuading him, talking him off the ledge to offer $1,800, and he finally agreed. The salesperson didn't bat an eye and he walked out of the store with a very nice guitar for $1,800. Don't feel sorry for the store. I'm sure they made a handsome profit. Next, let me talk about the DX7. I was living in Hallandale Beach, Florida, back in the mid and late 80s, and there was a local pawn store that I would regularly shop at because they often had great gear at great prices. One day, a mint condition Yamaha DX7IIFD showed up, and it included a soft case. I asked the owner how much it was. He said $1,200, which was a great deal on what looked like a new item, but I didn't have that kind of money. For the next several weeks, I stopped by the store, and still there was my shiny DX7 taunting me. He often asked if I was interested in buying anything, or did I just stop by to talk? Because we would chat, and he would tell me stories about moving down from New York to a warmer climate. I told him I was interested in the DX7, but I couldn't afford to pay more than $700. Truth was, I didn't even have $700. He turned me down anyway. A few weeks later, I went in, and there was this young man behind the counter. I asked where the owner was, and he said in a strong New York accent that Uncle Tony was in the hospital. I know I don't do that well. I asked if Tony was okay, and apparently it was a mild heart attack. The young guy asked if I was Jeff, and I said yes. He said that Uncle Tony had told him that if Jeff came into the store and was still interested in the Yamaha, that he was to sell it to me for $700. Apparently, Uncle Tony did not have health insurance. So I pulled out an American Express card that had been sitting in my wallet for some time and I'd never used, and I handed it over. To my surprise, it worked. And I was, and still am, the proud owner of a Yamaha DX7IIFD. The story about the baby grand piano is essentially the same. It was traded in a local piano store in Palo Alto, California. I was interested in buying a baby grand, and this one was in poor shape, but sounded okay, and I had dreams of refurbishing it. I would stop in every day or so, and it was still $2,500, even though I told the salesperson I could only afford $1,000. Then one day I stopped in, and without even asking, he offered it to me for $1,000, and I bought it. This was more than 50% off the sales price, but this is a different case than the Juno 106 sample I gave you earlier. Let me explain. Someone traded in this piano on a new piano or a better used piano. The piano broker had already made a tidy profit, and this sale was probably just bonus bucks. Pianos take up a lot of space in the showroom, and they probably hadn't had any nibbles on this used relic that I was only too happy to buy. Last, the story of me buying a used 1993 Acura NSX. I had always wanted one of these cars. A friend had owned one for a while in 1991, and he had bought it new, and I could only dream of owning one. In the year 2000, I was in a position where I could think about buying one used. These cars are quite rare. Not many were made compared to, say, the Honda Civic, which was the car I was driving at the time and had bought new in 1988. A gray Honda Civic LX. Four-door. I live in Silicon Valley, and I traveled within about 100 miles of where I live, looking at the few that were for sale around me. I wanted a 1993 or newer. The more options, the better. It had to be all original, and a 1993 was probably my best bet price-wise. I was looking on the web constantly when I came across one in Denver, Colorado. It was a 1993. It was red. The only option it didn't have was remote power door locks, but I knew that I could buy the module from Acura and install it myself for about $300. Thanks, NSX Prime. I flew to Denver and rented a car. It was the only time I've used Priceline to buy tickets, and they were inexpensive. I found my way to the dealership and test drove the car. It had 22,000 miles on the odometer, was in pristine condition, and I wanted it. We negotiated for all of 15 minutes. The price as listed was about $46,000 or $48,000. I offered $37,500. I thought that was fair and a good deal for both parties. The salesperson did the usual, let me talk with my manager, came back, they came down a couple of $1,000s each time, and then they wouldn't budge off of $42,000. We were at an impasse. I was polite, I thanked the salesperson for his time, and left the dealership. When I looked back at his face, he actually looked kind of stunned that I was leaving after flying all the way back out to Denver, or Colorado from California. Anyway, I flew back to California, and the following weekend I drove to San Diego for a wedding. It only occurs to me now that I should have scoped out used NSXs while I was there, but I didn't. Instead, I went to the X Games to pass some time. I think it was in Carlsbad that year. I used to skateboard when I was a kid, so it was interesting to me. That Saturday at the wedding reception, my cell phone rang. Hi, Jeff, this is Jim at XYZ Motorsport. You still interested in the NSX? I go, yeah, at my price. He said, you got it. The rest was overnight documents and a cashier's check, an inspection at a Denver Acura dealer that gave the car a clean bill of health. Acura didn't charge me that much, actually. They didn't charge me an arm and a leg to do it. The Acura dealer also told me that they brought the car down on a trailer. They didn't drive it down. That's pretty cool. I was pretty sure the NSX was going to be a hard sell for them. It was something like October or early November. I don't remember exactly, but to paraphrase the Game of Thrones, winter was coming. I do remember that it was Thanksgiving Day when I installed the door lock module. No one is going to buy an NSX in November or December and drive it around in Denver snow. I live in sunny California. My patience paid off, and I had done my homework. It doesn't always work out this well, but it did in this case. Here's a picture of me with my prized NSX. For reasons beyond my control, which wasn't financial, I owned the NSX outright. I traded it in on an Acura TL. I do miss it. I'd love to have one of the new ones, but it's way beyond my price range. And anyway, they've stopped making them now. Oh well. To summarize, 1, patience. You have to be willing to walk away and come back another day. 2, you have to ask for a deal. Make your best offer or ask them for their best price. It shows them that you're interested and willing to deal. 3, be polite. A lowball offer is practically by definition an insult, but you can clothe it with softness if you have tact. Number 4, don't settle for less than what you truly want unless you simply will never be able to afford the item you really want. Lastly, pawn store tips, but this is probably mostly anecdotal. Everything I've just said is valid for finding deals at pawn stores. However, I want to tell you a really cool story. Back before computers and mostly before the internet, pawn stores had paper inventory systems and relied on books with published used music gear prices. They wouldn't know what items were worth without looking in these books, and they had to buy a new set each year. One thing they did for inventory was use acronyms, and I learned this tip decades ago from a friend that worked at a pawn store. The acronym they used at his store was Quick Turn, Quickturn, but they replaced the U in turn with a Y. Each letter had a value. Q was 1, U was 2, I was 3, C was 4, and so on. There are 9 letters in Quick Turn, and for 0, they used an X. On price tags, they would put 2 prices, one that you would recognize like $250, which was the sales price. They would also put a code, say QXX. Remember, Q is 1 and X is 0, so QXX is 100. This told the salesperson how much money they had invested in the item. In this case, $100. Now, if the purchaser tried to negotiate, the salesperson knew they had to get at least more money than they had in the item. And they knew what that was without looking it up. Armed with this knowledge, I got some really great deals on gear back in the 80s. It was pretty easy to go into a store, look at a few price tags, and figure out their acronym. It was like having a secret decoder ring. You've seen the movie A Christmas Story, right? You'll shoot your eye out, kid. It's been quite a while since I've shopped at pawn stores. Also, I imagine few if any handle inventory and price listing this way anymore. But I thought you might find it interesting. Hopefully I haven't wasted your time. Take care, and I'll be back in another video soon.